Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back to a time when the world felt much larger and the winters felt much longer. Imagine standing on the edge of a vast, silent wilderness as the very first fingers of frost begin to curl around the edges of the world. You are a frontier settler, and your entire existence is about to be measured by the strength of your walls and the height of your woodpile. We often think of the frontier as a place of endless summer adventures or golden harvests, but the reality of a pioneer winter was a quiet, relentless battle against the invisible force of the cold. You probably believe that these settlers spent their evenings sitting peacefully by a roaring fire with a mug of hot cider. But in reality, they were more likely huddled under 5 layers of wool, wondering if the potatoes in the cellar had turned into blocks of ice. It was a time of immense grit, where the luxury of the season was simply waking up to find that your water bucket hadn't frozen solid on the kitchen table before you get too comfortable and possibly fall asleep halfway through. Tap like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this odd mix of boredom and history. It keeps the channel alive and the stories just sleepy enough to help you drift off again next time. I would love to hear where you are listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. Are you tucked under a modern duvet, or perhaps listening while the wind whistles outside your own window? Now dim the lights, let the world outside grow quiet, and turn on a fan if you like that soft, steady hum in the background. Let your shoulders loosen and your breathing slow. This is your time to drift. No rush, no deadlines, no noise. Just you, a little warmth in the air, and the faint whisper of history waiting to unfold. So, settle in, and let's ease gently into tonight's journey together. The sun is hanging lower in the sky now, a pale, buttery disk that offers very little warmth to your chilled skin. You stand in the center of your clearing, watching the long shadows of the pines stretch across the brittle grass. The vibrant greens of summer have faded into a muted palette of brown, gold, and gray. You can smell it in the air, a sharp, metallic scent that tells you the great white void is coming. This is the first frost, the moment when the earth holds its breath before the long sleep. You reach down and touch a leaf of the late season kale, feeling the delicate, icy crystals that have formed overnight. They crunch softly under your thumb, a tiny warning of the miles of snow that will soon bury this ground. Your boots make a dull thud on the hardened earth as you turn toward the cabin, the one small box of warmth you have built with your own hands. Survival in this environment is not about sudden bursts of energy. It is about a slow, methodical preparation that begins months before the first flake of snow ever touches the ground. You look at your woodpile, which you have been building since the middle of July. It is a massive wall of oak, maple, and birch, stacked with a precision that would make a modern architect jealous. You know that this pile of wood is essentially your life insurance policy. If the stack is too short, the fire goes out in February. If the wood is too green, the chimney clogs with soot and fills your tiny home with thick, stinging smoke. You pick up a stray log and carry it toward the porch, feeling the rough texture of the bark against your calloused palms. In the modern world, we think of seasonal depression as something we fix with a special lamp and a scented candle. But for you, the coming winter is a physical weight that you have to carry on your back every day. The harvest is mostly finished, and the rhythm of your day has shifted from the frantic energy of planting to the heavy, rhythmic labor of storage. You spend hours in the garden, digging up the last of the root vegetables. The earth is cold and damp, clinging to your fingernails as you pull carrots and turnips from their dark beds. Each vegetable is a small victory, a nugget of energy that you will need when the sun disappears for weeks at a time. You carry a heavy basket of potatoes toward the root cellar, a hole dug deep into the side of a hill. The air inside the cellar is still and smells of wet stone and old dirt. You arrange the potatoes carefully in bins filled with dry sand, ensuring that no two potatoes are touching. If one rot sets in, it can spread like a quiet plague through your entire winter supply. It is a delicate balance of moisture and temperature, a primitive form of refrigeration that requires constant attention. Historians still argue whether the extreme weather of the 1800s was caused more by volcanic eruptions or solar cycles. But to you, the cause does not matter nearly as much as the effect. You only know that the winters are getting longer and the frost is digging deeper into the soil. You remember stories of the Little Ice Age, a period that lasted from roughly 1300 to 1850, when the Thames in London froze over and the Baltic Sea became a highway for sledges. Out here on the frontier, you are living on the tail end of that era. Your smart home consists of a single room with a dirt floor and a roof made of sod and timber, and your only data point is the thickness of the fur on the squirrels you see darting through the trees. If the squirrels are extra fluffy this year, you know you need to find another cord of wood. It is a simple, brutal logic that governs every choice you make. You spend an entire afternoon checking the walls of your cabin. Over the summer, the logs have shifted and dried, opening up tiny cracks that the winter wind will find with the precision of a needle. You carry a bucket of chinking material, a mixture of mud, straw, and sometimes animal hair, and begin to press it into the gaps between the timber. You use a small wooden paddle to smooth the mixture, feeling the dampness seep into your gloves. This is the only thing standing between you and the howling gales that will soon whip across the prairie. You think of it as a giant puzzle, filling in the holes to create a solid, unbroken barrier. It is meditative work, the repetitive motion of reaching, pressing, and smoothing helping to quiet your mind as the light begins to fail. You imagine the wind outside, searching for an entrance, only to be turned away by your careful handiwork. As the dusk settles, you move toward the barn to check on your livestock. The cow and the 2 horses are already growing their thick winter coats, their breath coming out in white puffs that vanish into the darkening air. You check the hayloft, ensuring that the dried grass is stacked high and stays dry. In some parts of the frontier, when the blizzards become truly life-threatening, settlers have been known to bring their most valuable animals right into the cabin with them. It sounds strange to a modern ear, the idea of sharing a bedroom with a confused cow, but the body heat of a large animal is a powerful furnace. It is a quirky tidbit of frontier history that shows just how blurred the lines became between human and beast when the temperature dropped to 40 below zero. For now, you just give them an extra scoop of grain and ensure their water trough isn't already skimming over with ice. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere is cozy but cramped. The single room serves as your kitchen, bedroom, workshop, and living room. The center of the world is the hearth, a large stone fireplace that never truly goes out from November until April. You lean over and stir the embers, watching the orange glow brighten as you add a few small sticks of kindling. The sound of the fire catching is a soft, rhythmic crackle, a heartbeat for the house. You have to be careful with the fire, though. If it gets too hot, you risk a chimney fire that could turn your wooden sanctuary into a pile of ash in minutes. If it is too low, the edges of the room will begin to grow hair, matted coats of white frost. You have learned to read the fire like a book, knowing exactly when to add a heavy log of oak to keep the heat steady through the night. Your evening meal is simple, a thick stew of dried venison and those carrots you just dug up. You eat slowly, savoring the warmth that spreads through your chest. There is no television, no internet, and no flickering screen to distract you. Instead, you listen to the sounds of the cabin. You hear the soft groan of the roof timbers as they contract in the cold. You hear the dry rustle of the corn husks in your mattress as you shift your weight. Everything feels heavy and slow, as if the entire world is moving underwater. You realize that your ancestors didn't just survive the cold. They adapted their entire internal clock to match the shorter days. You find yourself yawning as the sun disappears completely, your body signaling that it is time to conserve energy. You reach for a book, one of the 3 you own, and read by the flickering light of a tallow candle. The candle is made of rendered animal fat, and it gives off a faint, savory smell that reminds you of Sunday dinner. It isn't the most pleasant scent, but it is better than the alternative of total darkness. Lighting in the frontier was a constant struggle. You probably think of oil lamps as the standard, but whale oil was expensive and hard to come by in the middle of the woods. Most often, you relied on rushlights, pith from dried reeds dipped in grease, or the simple, steady glow of the fireplace. The light is dim, making the corners of the room dance with shadows, but it is enough to see the pages. You read the same stories over and over, the familiar words acting as a bridge to a world you left behind long ago. Before you climb into bed, you perform the nightly ritual of banking the fire. You use a shovel to cover the glowing coals with a thick layer of ash. This starves the fire of oxygen, allowing the embers to smolder slowly all night without burning out. In the morning, you will peel back the ash to find a living core of heat, ready to start the day's fire. It is a metaphor for your own survival, keeping that small, internal spark protected from the vast, cold world outside. You wrap yourself in several layers of wool blankets, feeling the weight of them press down on you like a heavy hand. Your organic bed is a wooden frame laced with ropes, topped with a sack of straw. It isn't a memory foam mattress, but after a day of hauling wood and digging potatoes, it feels like the height of luxury. As you lie there, drifting toward sleep, you think about the mainstream historical fact that most people forget. The frontier wasn't just a place, it was a test of endurance. The survival rate in some of the northern territories during particularly harsh winters was surprisingly low, yet people kept coming, drawn by the promise of land and a fresh start. You are part of that lineage now, a tiny point of light in a dark forest. You hear the first real wind of the season begin to pick up, a low, mournful whistle as it passes through the tops of the trees. It pushes against your cabin walls, searching for a gap, but the mud and straw hold firm. You are safe, you are warm, and you have enough wood to last until the sun returns. The rhythm of the frontier is a slow dance with nature. You don't fight the winter, you move with it. You learn to appreciate the small things, the way the light reflects off a frozen window pane, the smell of fresh cedar, the silence of a snow-covered field. Your thoughts begin to blur together, becoming as soft and indistinct as the falling snow. You imagine the flakes starting to drift down outside, landing silently on the roof, adding another layer of insulation to your home. Each flake is a tiny piece of the silence that will soon define your life for the next 4 months. You let your breathing slow, matching the steady rhythm of the fire's dying glow. The world outside is cold, but inside you have everything you need. You are a settler, a survivor, and tonight, the winter can do its worst while you sleep. The transition from autumn to winter is a mental shift as much as a physical one. You start to notice how the sound of the forest changes. The cheerful chirping of songbirds has been replaced by the occasional, harsh caw of a crow or the distant, lonely hoot of an owl. Even the wind sounds different in the summer. It rustles through leaves with a soft, papery sound, but now it has a sharp, whistling edge as it cuts through bare branches. You find yourself moving more deliberately, being careful not to slip on the patches of black ice that form on the rocks by the stream. A broken leg in November could be a death sentence, so you treat every step with respect. You are learning the language of the land in its most honest season. You spend one final day by the creek, gathering heavy stones. You haul them back to the cabin in a small cart, your breath visible in the air like ghostly ribbons. These stones will be heated by the fire and then wrapped in thick flannel to be placed at the foot of your bed. It is a simple technology, but one that makes the difference between a restless, shivering night and a deep, restorative sleep. There is something deeply satisfying about the weight of a warm stone against your feet when the air in the room is cold enough to turn your breath to mist. You also gather a final bundle of herbs, sage, thyme, and mint, hanging them from the rafters to dry. They will add flavor to your bland winter meals and serve as a fragrant reminder of the garden that now lies dormant under the frost. Historians often focus on the big battles or the political shifts of the frontier, but the real history is written in these small, daily acts of preparation. It is written in the callus on your thumb and the way you tilt your head to listen to the ice. You are part of a grand experiment in human resilience, proving that even without electricity or central heating, the human spirit can carve out a place of comfort in a frozen wilderness. You realize that your modern, day counterparts might find this life boring or difficult, but there is a profound peace in knowing exactly what you need to do to survive. There are no emails to answer, no traffic to navigate, just the wood, the fire, and the food in the cellar. As the last light of Section 1 fades, you feel a sense of completion. You have done the work. The cabin is sealed, the wood is stacked, and the cellar is full. You are ready for the white veil to fall. You close your eyes, and the image of the golden fields is replaced by the soft, gray light of an approaching storm. The cold is no longer an enemy, it is simply the context of your life. You are a pioneer, and you are exactly where you are meant to be. The transition is complete, and the deep winter is about to begin. You sink deeper into your straw mattress, the warmth of the hearth reaching out to touch your face one last time before you drift into a dreamless, peaceful sleep, ready to face the long, cold days that lie ahead. The silence of the frontier is not an empty silence. It is a thick, heavy presence that settles over the landscape like a blanket. It is the sound of the earth turning inward, reflecting on the growth of the past year and preparing for the renewal of the next. You have learned to find comfort in this silence. It is a reprieve from the constant noise of the growing season, a time to rest and reflect. You think about the people who lived here before you, and those who will come after, all of them bound by the same cycle of the seasons. You are a link in a chain, a single heartbeat in the long history of this land. The frost on the window pane creates intricate patterns, like tiny, frozen forests, reminding you that there is beauty even in the harshest conditions. You let your mind wander through those frozen forests, drifting further and further away from the worries of the world, until there is nothing left but the soft, steady rhythm of your own breath and the fading warmth of the fire. The day finally comes when the gray clouds refuse to break. The air is so still it feels heavy, and you know the first true snow is only minutes away. You take one last walk around the perimeter of your small clearing, checking the latches on the sheds and ensuring the chimney is drawing well. You see a single, brave deer at the edge of the woods, its coat a deep, tawny brown against the dark trunks of the trees. It looks at you for a long moment, an acknowledgement between two creatures who are about to endure the same trial. Then, with a flick of its tail, it vanishes into the shadows. The first flake of snow falls, landing on your sleeve. It is perfect, symmetrical, and cold. You watch it for a second before it melts into a tiny drop of water. Then another falls, and another, until the air is filled with a swirling dance of white. You turn back to your door, step inside, and slide the heavy wooden bolt into place. The world is gone now, replaced by the four walls of your home and the steady glow of the hearth. You are ready. The world outside has effectively ceased to exist, replaced by a swirling, opaque curtain of white that makes the familiar trees look like ghostly apparitions. You stand by the small, thick window of your cabin, watching the snow pile against the glass. It accumulates in delicate, sloping drifts that eventually block the lower panes, turning your view into a cross-section of the storm. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and the lingering aroma of the dried herbs hanging from the rafters. You realize that your cabin is no longer just a house. It has become a pressurized vessel of warmth floating in a sea of absolute zero. Every log, every handful of dried mud, and every heavy stone in the chimney is now working overtime to keep the void at bay. You run your hand along the wall, feeling the rough, cool texture of the timber. You can feel the vibration of the wind as it slams into the exterior, a low, rhythmic thud that resonates through the floorboards and into the soles of your feet. Building a shelter on the frontier was less about aesthetics and more about the physics of heat retention. Most pioneer cabins were intentionally kept small, often measuring no more than 16 by 20 feet, because a larger space was simply impossible to keep warm with a single hearth. You probably think of these tiny homes as cramped or claustrophobic, But when the temperature outside drops low enough to shatter a ceramic jug, you start to view every square inch of empty air as a potential thief of your body heat. Historians still argue whether the soddy, the classic house made of earth and grass, was a preferred choice for its incredible thermal mass, or simply a desperate necessity for those who settled on the treeless plains. For you, in the timberlands, the log cabin is your fortress. You look up at the ceiling, where the heavy ridgepole holds the weight of the roof. You spent weeks stripping the bark from those logs, knowing that any trapped moisture or insects would eventually rot the wood from the inside out. Now, that labor is the only thing keeping the heavy snow from crushing you in your sleep. The true secret to your survival is the chinking, the material wedged between the logs. Over the last few days, you have noticed a few spots where the wind seems to whistle through with a particularly sharp edge. You reach for a bucket of spare clay and straw you kept near the hearth to stay soft. You find a gap where the wood has shrunk in the dry winter air, and you begin to pack the mixture into the crevice. In some regions, settlers used a mix of mud, lime, and even hog hair to create a reinforced binder that acted like a primitive form of fiberglass. It is a messy, repetitive task, but there is something deeply satisfying about silencing a draft. You imagine the cold as a living thing, a hungry beast trying to poke its frozen fingers through the cracks, only to be blocked by your careful repairs. If you think your modern heating bill is a hassle, try spending your Tuesday afternoon literally gluing your house back together with a mixture of dirt and animal fur. The hearth is the literal heart of the cabin, a massive structure of fieldstone that dominates the room. You have learned that the fire is not just a source of light, it is a temperamental guest that requires constant feeding and attention. You spend a large portion of your day tending to the embers, ensuring that the draft in the chimney is pulling the smoke upward and out. If the wind shifts, the cabin can fill with thick, gray smoke in seconds, forcing you to open the door and lose all your precious heat. It is a delicate dance of opening and closing small vents you've carved into the walls. One quirky tidbit of frontier life is that many settlers actually preferred a slightly smoky house, believing the creosote helped to preserve the interior wood and keep away certain pests that might try to seek refuge in the warmth. Whether or not it worked is up for debate, but you certainly smell like a piece of smoked ham most of the time, so you suppose the pests might at least find you unappealing. You move to the corner where you keep your fancy, lighting a small lamp filled with rendered lard. It provides a flickering, dim glow that barely reaches the edges of the room, but it is enough to see the stack of newspapers you've saved. You aren't reading them for the news, which is likely months old anyway. You are using them as extra insulation. You begin to tack the pages to the interior walls, layering the paper to create a thin barrier of trapped air. It is a common frontier trick, turning the local gazette into a wallpaper of survival. You catch glimpses of headlines about distant cities and political debates that feel like they belong to a different planet. Out here, the only breaking news that matters is the thickness of the ice on the pond and the remaining height of your woodpile. You laugh softly to yourself, thinking that even in the 1800s, people were finding ways to make the media useful for something other than its intended purpose. The windows are another point of vulnerability. Glass is a luxury you cannot afford in large quantities, so your cabin has only two small openings. To keep the heat in, you have covered the panes with heavy shutters and stuffed the gaps with old rags. Some of your neighbors use greased paper, animal parchment soaked in oil to make it translucent, which allows a ghostly, amber light to filter in while blocking the wind. It creates a strange, underwater atmosphere inside the cabin, as if you are living in a submarine made of oak and pine. You watch the way the light shifts as the sun moves behind the clouds, the amber glow deepening into a rich orange. It is a quiet, beautiful kind of isolation. You are untethered from the world, floating in a small bubble of human persistence. As the evening progresses, you notice the rhythmic ticking of the cabin. This is the sound of the logs expanding and contracting in the extreme cold. Sometimes, a particularly sharp frost will cause a log to pop with a sound as loud as a pistol shot, a phenomenon known as frost cracking. It can be startling the first few times you hear it, but now it is just part of the winter soundtrack. You check the floor, which is made of tightly packed earth, covered with a layer of braided straw mats. You have to be careful where you step. Even with the fire roaring, the floor remains cold enough to numb your toes if you stand in one place for too long. You've learned to wear heavy moccasins lined with rabbit fur, which provide a soft, cushioned warmth that moves with you. Life in the cabin is a series of small, tactical maneuvers designed to keep your extremities from turning into icicles. You take a moment to look at your reflection in a small, tarnished mirror. Your face is smudged with soot, and your eyes look tired but steady. There is a mainstream historical fact that is often overlooked. The average lifespan on the frontier was significantly influenced by these winter months. It wasn't just the cold that was dangerous, it was the respiratory issues caused by breathing in wood smoke and the lack of fresh air for months on end. You make a mental note to crack the door for just a moment later tonight, despite the loss of heat, just to let the stale air circulate. It is a trade-off you have to make every day, the safety of the warmth versus the necessity of the breath. You are learning that survival is rarely about making one big decision. It is about making 1,000 tiny ones, over and over, until the spring arrives. The weight of the snow on the roof is a constant concern. You can hear it sliding occasionally, a heavy, muffled sound that makes the rafters groan. You know that if the snow gets too deep, it can act as a wonderful insulator, trapping the cabin's heat inside like a giant white blanket. However, if it becomes too heavy, especially if it rains and then freezes, the weight can exceed the structural limits of your hand-hewn beams. You have a long pole with a flat board attached to the end, which you use to scrape the excess snow from the eaves. It is a cold, exhausting job that requires you to step outside into the biting wind for 20 minutes at a time. When you return, the heat of the cabin feels like a physical embrace, a reward for your labor. You stand by the fire, watching the steam rise from your wet wool coat, the smell of damp sheep filling the room. You decide to prepare a simple meal of cornmeal mush, a staple of the frontier diet. You stir the yellow grains into a pot of boiling water, watching as they thicken into a dense, nourishing paste. It isn't exactly a 5-course dinner at a French bistro, but it provides the slow, burning carbohydrates your body needs to maintain its internal furnace. You add a small dollop of maple syrup, a treat you harvested yourself last spring, and the sweetness feels like a tiny explosion of joy on your tongue. You eat slowly, savoring the warmth as it radiates from your stomach to your limbs. In the modern world, we eat for pleasure or out of habit. But here, you eat for fuel. Every calorie is a brick you are adding to the wall of your endurance. The cabin feels smaller at night, the shadows pressing in from the corners. You have a small collection of tools that you keep near the hearth. A draw knife, a small axe, and a few sharpening stones. Winter is the time for maintenance, for repairing the things that broke during the frantic pace of the harvest. You spend an hour sharpening your tools, the rhythmic shing of metal against stone providing a soothing counterpoint to the wind. You find a meditative quality in the work, the focus required to maintain a perfect edge, helping to drown out the loneliness that can sometimes creep in when the sun sets at 4 in the afternoon. You are a craftsman of your own survival, ensuring that when the spring finally comes, you will be ready to hit the ground running. One of the more quirky tidbits of this era is the use of bed warmers, copper pans filled with hot coals that you slide between the sheets before climbing in. Since you don't have a copper pan, you use the heated stones we discussed earlier. You wrap them in several layers of old flannel to ensure they don't scorch the straw mattress. There is a specific technique to placing them. You want one at your feet and one near the small of your back. It creates a pocket of warmth that allows you to relax your muscles, which have been tensed against the cold all day. You probably think of a cold bed as a minor annoyance, but when the air in your room is 20 degrees Fahrenheit, a warm bed is the difference between a night of shivering and a night of true rest. As you prepare for sleep, you think about the concept of cabin fever. It isn't just a catchy phrase, it's a very real psychological challenge. Being confined to a single room for weeks at a time with the same person, or even worse, entirely alone, can strain the mind in ways that are hard to describe. You have to stay busy to keep your thoughts moving even when your body is stationary. You find yourself talking to the fire, or perhaps to the small wooden carvings you've made to decorate the mantel. It isn't madness. It's a way of populating your world when the rest of it has been erased by the snow. You are the king of this small, wooden island, and your subjects are the tools, the fire, and the memories of the summer sun. You check the door one last time, ensuring the heavy oak bolt is seated firmly in its notches. You can feel the cold air pressing against the wood, trying to find a way in. The door is thick, made of 2 layers of planks with a sheet of canvas sandwiched between them. It is a masterpiece of functional design, heavy enough to stop a bear and solid enough to hold back the frost. You blow out the lard lamp, and the room plunged into the soft, flickering orange light of the banked fire. The shadows of the rafters stretch across the ceiling like the ribs of a great ship. You are safe. You are enclosed. The great white void is out there, but in here, there is life. You climb into your bed, the straw rustling softly beneath you. The weight of the quilts is immense, at least 4 or 5 layers of heavy wool and patchworked cotton. It feels like being buried in a warm, soft grave. You tuck the edges of the blankets tightly around your shoulders, creating a seal that traps your body heat. You can hear your own heart beating, a steady, rhythmic thud that matches the pulsing light of the fire. You realize that this is what it means to be a settler, to be a tiny, stubborn flame in the middle of a vast, frozen dark. You aren't just enduring the winter. You are claiming this piece of the world, one cold night at a time. Historians still argue whether the extreme isolation of the frontier led to a unique frontier psyche, characterized by hyper-independence, or if it actually fostered a deeper sense of community when people finally did gather. You suspect it is a bit of both. You feel a strange sense of pride in yourself, reliance, but you also find yourself dreaming of the first community dance in the spring, where the sound of a fiddle will finally break the silence of the snow. For now, though, the silence is your companion. It is a heavy, velvet silence that pillows your thoughts and slows your pulse. You let the images of the day, the mud, the logs, the glowing hearth, drift away, replaced by the formless, gray, white expanse of the storm. You are drifting now, the warmth of the stones at your feet spreading upward through your legs. The cabin groans softly, a familiar, comforting sound that tells you the structure is holding. You imagine the snow continuing to fall, layer upon layer, until the cabin is completely encased in a shimmering, white shell. You are a seed buried deep in the earth, waiting for the thaw, but perfectly content in your winter dormancy. The world outside can howl and scream, but inside, the fire smolders and the blankets hold firm. You are a survivor. You are a pioneer. And tonight, the great white void is just a backdrop for your dreams. The rhythm of the snow against the roof is like a lullaby, a soft, percussive sound that lulls you deeper into relaxation. You think about the mainstream historical fact that many frontier families would read the Bible or other shared books aloud to each other to keep the silence at bay. Even without a companion, you find the internal monologue of your own thoughts to be a comforting presence. You remember the smell of the pine trees in the summer, the way the sap felt sticky on your fingers, and you use that memory to anchor yourself. The winter is long, but it is not eternal. Each night you survive is one night closer to the return of the birds and the melting of the ice. You let out a long, slow breath, watching it bloom into a faint mist in the cool air of the room before it vanishes. You are part of the history of this place, a quiet witness to the power of the seasons. You close your eyes, the orange glow of the hearth fading behind your eyelids, and you surrender to the deep, heavy sleep that only a winter night can provide. The logs tick, the fire pulses, and the snow continues its silent, relentless work. But you are warm, you are safe, and you are home. The hunger of a winter morning is a specific kind of hollow, a quiet ache that reminds you that your body is a furnace burning through fuel just to maintain its own internal spark. You sit on the edge of your bed, feeling the cool air settle against your skin as you reach for your heavy wool socks. Today, the work is not in the fields or the forest, but in the dark, quiet sanctuary of your food stores. You walk across the cabin floor, your footsteps light on the straw mats, and open the heavy wooden trapdoor that leads to the root cellar. A puff of cool, earthy air rises to meet you, a scent that is a complex perfume of damp soil, sweet onions, and the sharp, fermented tang of cabbage. You descend the narrow ladder, feeling the temperature drop and stabilize as you move below the frost line. This is your vault, your treasury. where every calorie you labored for during the long summer months is now resting in the dark, waiting to keep you alive. In the modern world, we treat a trip to the grocery store as a minor errand, a task sandwiched between a workout and a phone call. We are surrounded by an abundance that makes the concept of a starving time feel like a fairy tale. But for you, standing in the dim light of a single candle in your cellar, these shelves are the only thing standing between your family and a very literal end. You run your hand over a row of glass jars, the surface is smooth and cold. Inside are preserved peaches, their orange flesh suspended in a thick, golden syrup. They look like trapped bits of summer sun, and just looking at them makes your mouth water. You probably think of canning as a hobby for people with too many mason jars and a Pinterest account, but in the mid-1800s, it was a high-stakes game of life and death. If the seal on a jar failed, you didn't just lose a snack, you lost a piece of your future. Historians still argue whether the physical toll of monotonous diets caused more mental breakdowns than the actual isolation of the frontier. Imagine eating nothing but cornmeal and salt pork for 90 days straight. It is a psychological test as much as a nutritional one. You find yourself staring at a turnip with the same intensity someone might use to study a fine diamond, looking for any sign of soft spots or rot. To break up the monotony, you have to get creative with the limited palette of ingredients you have. This leads to some of the most fascinating life hacks of the frontier era, such as the legendary vinegar pie. This is a quirky tidbit of frontier history that sounds absolutely unappealing to a modern palate. A pie made of sugar, butter, flour, and a heavy splash of apple cider vinegar. It was designed to mimic the tart, bright flavor of lemons, which were an impossible luxury in the middle of a frozen wilderness. It was called a desperation pie, a culinary illusion that gave the tongue a break from the dull flavors of dried grains. You smile at the thought of it. A dessert that is essentially a chemistry experiment born of boredom and cravings. You move to the back of the cellar, where the heavy barrels are kept. These are the anchors of your winter diet. You pull the heavy lid off the largest one, and the smell of salt and brine fills the small space. This is your salt pork, the battery of the frontier kitchen. A mainstream historical fact that many forget is that salt was the most important commodity on the frontier, often more valuable than gold or lead. Without salt, meat rotted, and without meat, the winter won. You look at the slabs of fatback and side meat submerged in the grayish liquid. It isn't pretty, and it certainly isn't lean, but that layer of white fat is what will provide the dense energy you need to chop wood in sub-zero temperatures. You use a long wooden fork to fish out a piece, the brine dripping back into the barrel with a soft, rhythmic sound. It is a slow, methodical process, much like everything else in this season. Next to the meat barrels are the crocks of sauerkraut. You remember the day you spent shredding cabbage until your arms ached, packing it down with layers of salt and heavy stones. Now, the fermentation is complete, and the cabbage has been transformed into a sour, crunchy source of vitamin C. You didn't know about vitamins in the modern sense, of course, but you knew from ancestral wisdom that people who ate the sour greens didn't get the bleeding gums and weakness that characterized scurvy. You take a small sample, the sharp acidity waking up your senses and making you feel a bit more alert. It is a humble food, But in the middle of a blizzard, a bowl of fermented cabbage is a gourmet meal. You arrange several heads of cabbage on the upper shelves, their outer leaves dry and papery, protecting the dense, sweet hearts inside. You spend a good portion of the morning sorting through the potato bin. You move the tubers from one side to the other, checking for the small, pale yes that signal they are trying to sprout prematurely. If they sprout too much, they lose their nutritional value and become soft and shriveled. You rub the dirt off a particularly large russet, its skin rough and brown. There is something deeply grounding about handling the earth's bounty in the dark. You feel like a squirrel in its burrow, a creature of the soil. You probably feel like you've eaten so many potatoes lately that you're starting to look like one. But you also know that a roasted potato with a little bit of pork fat is the closest thing to heaven on a Tuesday in January. You jokes to yourself that the frontier diet is just a very intense, very long-term version of Meal Prep Sunday, except the meal is always the same and the Sunday lasts for 6 months. The shelves also hold your dry goods, the items you couldn't grow but had to purchase or trade for during your last trip to the distant settlement. There is a small bag of precious white flour, a tin of coffee beans that you treat like black pearls, and a jar of thick, dark molasses. You handle the coffee tin with reverence, opening the lid just to catch a whiff of the rich, roasted aroma. It is a smell that connects you to the civilization you left behind, a reminder of busy streets and crowded shops. You only grind a few beans at a time, stretching the supply as far as it can go. A cup of coffee in the morning isn't just a caffeine delivery system. It is a ritual of normalcy, a 5-minute vacation from the reality of the cold. You imagine the steam rising from the mug, the heat warming your face, and the bitter taste cutting through the morning fog. As you work, you notice a small, dried bundle of herbs that had fallen behind a crate. It is sage, and as you crush a leaf between your fingers, the savory, peppery scent fills your nose. It reminds you of the harvest dinner you hosted when the leaves were still on the trees. You realize that food isn't just about survival. It's about memory. The taste of a dried apple slice takes you back to the orchard in late September, the sun warm on your neck and the sound of bees humming in the fallen fruit. You have strings of these dried apples hanging from the cabin rafters above, looking like shriveled, brown leather rings. They don't look like much, but when you soak them in water and bake them into a cobbler, they regain their spirit. You grab a handful to take upstairs, the dry pieces clicking together like wooden beads. You climb back up the ladder and close the trapdoor, the warmth of the cabin feeling intense after the cool dampness of the cellar. You move to the hearth and begin the process of preparing the midday meal. This is a slow affair, as everything must be reconstituted or softened over the fire. You set a heavy cast iron pot on the crane and swing it over the flames. Into the pot goes the salt pork, which you have rinsed several times to remove the excess salt, followed by some dried beans that have been soaking overnight. The beans are hard as pebbles when dry, but after a few hours of simmering, they become creamy and rich. You watch the bubbles break the surface of the water, a tiny, volcanic landscape of steam and heat. Life in the cabin during the winter is a series of these small, domestic rhythms. You spend hours sitting by the fire, grinding corn in a small hand mill. The scratch of the stones is a constant soundtrack to your afternoons. The resulting cornmeal is coarse and yellow, smelling of sunshine and dust. You will use it to make johnny cakes on a flat griddle, the batter sizzling as it hits the hot metal. You've become an expert at judging the temperature of the fire by the way the fat dances on the iron. If it's too hot, the outside burns while the inside stays raw. If it's too cool, the cake becomes a soggy, greasy mess. You find a strange, quiet pride in these skills. You aren't just a person who eats. You are a person who understands the elemental transformation of fire and grain. You take a break from the cooking to check on your mystery jars. These are the jars that lost their labels or were filled with the last bits of various harvests. Opening one is like a low-stakes game of frontier roulette. Is it pickled beets? Is it spiced pears? Is it the experimental green tomato relish that you weren't sure about? You find a jar of what looks like dark red berries and open it. The smell of elderberries wafts out, sweet and slightly medicinal. You remember picking these along the creek bed. Your fingers stained purple for 3 days. You decide to make a syrup out of them to help with the cough you've been feeling in your chest. The frontier was your pharmacy as much as your pantry, and you've learned to trust the plants as much as the medicine man's tonics. One of the more mainstream historical facts about frontier food is the reliance on hardtack, a simple biscuit made of flour, water, and salt. Baked until it was as hard as a brick. It was the ultimate survival food because it could last for years without spoiling, provided you kept the weevils out. You have a small box of it for emergencies, though you hope you never have to rely on it. Eating hardtack requires you to soak it in coffee or soup until it softens enough to bite, or you risk breaking a tooth. You think of it as the granola bar of the 19th century, though significantly less pleasant to chew. It is a reminder that sometimes survival is just about having something, anything, to put in your stomach when the blizzards keep you from the cellar for days at a time. You find yourself staring out the window at the white expanse, a piece of dried venison in your hand. The meat is tough and salty, requiring you to chew it slowly for a long time. This is jerked meat, a technique learned from the indigenous people of the plains. It is light, portable, and packed with protein. As you chew, the flavor begins to release, a deep, smoky taste that reflects the hours it spent over the hickory fire. You realize that you are eating the very essence of the forest. This deer lived in the shadows you now watch, and its strength is now becoming your strength. There is a profound, almost spiritual connection in that realization. You aren't just an observer of nature, you are a participant in its cycle of energy. The afternoon light begins to fade, turning the snow outside into a sea of deep indigo. You move back to the fire to check the bean pot. The smell has changed, becoming deeper and more savory. You add a bit of the molasses and a spoonful of mustard seed, the classic flavors of frontier baked beans. This meal will provide the warmth you need to get through the night. You probably think of baked beans as something that comes out of a can with a little plastic spoon. But here, it is a masterpiece of slow cooking. You serve yourself a large wooden bowl of the thick mixture, the steam curling around your face like a warm veil. You eat it with a hunk of cornbread, the crumbs falling into the rich sauce. It is the most delicious thing you have ever tasted. not because it is fancy, but because you know exactly how much work it took to bring those beans from the dry earth to your table. Historians still argue whether the extreme reliance on corn led to widespread nutritional deficiencies like pellagra in certain frontier communities. You don't know the names for these things, but you know that you feel better when you eat a variety of foods. That's why you value your small stash of dried berries and your jars of pickles. Variety isn't just the spice of life. It's the insurance policy for your health. You make a mental note to open a jar of the pickled onions tomorrow, just to keep your system balanced. You imagine your modern-day counterparts worrying about macros and superfoods, while you are just happy that the flour didn't get damp and the salt pork hasn't gone rancid. It is a simpler way of looking at the world, one that strips away the fluff and leaves only the essentials. You spend the evening by the fire, nursing a cup of switchel. This is a quirky beverage made of water, vinegar, ginger, and molasses. It was often called haymaker's punch because it was used to hydrate workers in the fields. But it is equally refreshing in the winter when you need a break from plain water. The ginger provides a gentle heat that warms your throat, and the vinegar gives it a bright, electrolyte-like kick. It is a strange drink by modern standards, but it is oddly addictive. You sip it slowly, feeling the ginger settle your stomach and the sugar give you a tiny boost of energy. You watch the fire die down to a bed of glowing coals, the orange light reflecting in the dark liquid of your cup. As you prepare for bed, you take one last look at your kitchen area. The pots are cleaned and hanging on their pegs, the corn mill is wiped down, and the jars are tucked back into their places. The room is quiet, save for the occasional pop of a log in the hearth. You feel a sense of deep satisfaction. The cellar is still mostly full, the barrels are holding their brine, and the desperation pie you made earlier is waiting on the sideboard for tomorrow's breakfast. You have outsmarted the winter for another day. You realize that the fear of hunger is always there, lurking in the back of your mind like a shadow, but you have the tools to keep it at bay. You are a provider, a curator of calories, and a master of the slow burn. The process of eating in the winter is almost a form of prayer. You are acknowledging the gifts of the earth and the effort of your own hands. You don't waste a single crumb, often using a piece of bread to wipe the last bit of sauce from your bowl. Every scrap is precious. You think about how much food is wasted in the world you came from, and you feel a pang of something like regret. Here, nothing is taken for granted. The apple core goes to the chickens, the grease from the pork is saved for soap or candles, and the bones are boiled until they give up every last bit of marrow. It is a closed loop, a perfect system of survival that leaves no room for excess. You climb into bed, the warmth of the beans still radiating from your stomach. You feel heavy and satisfied, your muscles relaxing as you sink into the straw mattress. The wind is starting to pick up again, a low whistle that tells you another storm is moving in. But it doesn't matter. You have enough wood for the fire and enough food in the cellar to last for months. You are like the bear in its den or the potato in its bin, dormant, protected, and waiting. The hunger is gone, replaced by a sleepy, comfortable fullness. You let the images of the red elderberries and the yellow cornmeal dance behind your eyelids. a colorful parade of summer memories that will sustain you through the long, dark night. The rhythm of the frontier is the rhythm of the harvest. You have learned to listen to your body, to know when it needs the heavy fat of the pork or the bright acidity of the cabbage. You are in tune with the requirements of survival, a living bridge between the bounty of the past and the promise of the spring. You close your eyes, the smell of the hearth and the lingering scent of sage lulling you into a deep, restorative slumber. The world outside is a frozen wasteland, but inside your cabin and inside your very being, there is a storehouse of life that the cold can never touch. You are fed, you are warm, and you are ready for whatever the great white void brings next. The silence of the night is a blanket, and the fullness of your belly is a shield. Sleep comes easily, a soft descent into the dark, where the only thing that matters is the steady, rhythmic beat of a heart that has been well fed. The morning air inside the cabin is so sharp it feels like it has teeth. You lie perfectly still for a moment, watching the ghost of your own breath rise toward the rafters in a steady, rhythmic pulse. The fire has burned down to a faint orange eye in the hearth, and the heavy blankets that felt like a burden last night are now the only thing keeping you from the absolute zero of the room. You know that the transition from the warmth of the bed to the reality of the day is a tactical operation. In the modern world, you might just hop out and turn up a thermostat, perhaps grumbling because the floor is a little chilly on your way to a steaming shower. But here, the act of getting dressed is your first and most important victory of the day. You reach out a single arm, the skin immediately pebbled with goosebumps, and snag the bundle of clothes you tucked under the blankets with you last night. This is a classic Frontier Pro tip. By keeping your clothes inside the bed, you use your own body heat to ensure they aren't literal blocks of ice when you pull them on. You begin with the base layer, the legendary Union suit. This is a single, continuous garment of heavy, cream-colored wool that covers you from your neck to your ankles. Sliding into it is a slow process of wiggling and stretching, the fabric feeling thick and slightly coarse against your skin. You probably think of wool as the ultimate, itchy fabric, and you aren't entirely wrong. But in this environment, a little itch is a small price to pay for your life. It is a well-documented mainstream historical fact that wool was the preferred fabric of the frontier, because it retains its insulating properties even when wet, unlike cotton, which becomes a cold, heavy rag the moment it touches moisture. As you button the front, you appreciate the trapdoor in the back, a design feature that is one part practical necessity and one part social experiment in humility. You jokes to yourself that frontier fashion is essentially just figuring out how many layers of sheep you can wear before you can no longer bend your elbows. Once the Union suit is secured, you add the second layer, a pair of heavy trousers made of homespun wool and a thick, long-sleeved shirt. These garments have a weight to them that modern clothing lacks. They don't just sit on your body, they anchor you to the earth. The shirt is a deep, forest green, dyed with extracts from the very trees that surround your cabin. You can smell the faint, oily scent of lanolin, the natural wax found in sheep's wool. This oil helps the fabric shed water and snow, acting as a primitive but effective raincoat. You notice how the fibers of the wool are interlocking, creating tiny pockets of air. This is the secret to everything you are wearing. You aren't actually warming yourself with the fabric. You are building a series of tiny, invisible rooms of trapped air around your body, and your own metabolism is the heater for those rooms. As you move about the cabin, your movements are slightly stiff, making you look like a very stressed out sheep trying to navigate a kitchen. You add a vest, often called a waistcoat, which provides an extra layer of protection for your core. Historians still argue whether the traditional European layering system was more effective than the indigenous methods of using single, heavy skin garments lined with hollow, fiber furs like caribou or deer. While the European style offered more flexibility, the indigenous style was arguably superior for extreme, stationary cold. You find yourself somewhere in the middle, blending the two worlds. Over your wool shirt, you pull on a buckskin jacket that you spent weeks tanning and sewing. The leather is soft but incredibly tough, serving as a windbreak that prevents the biting gales from stripping away the warm air trapped in your wool layers. It is the outer shell of your personal survival pod. Your attention turns to your feet, which are the most vulnerable part of your anatomy in the great white void. You start with a pair of thin silk stockings, a rare luxury you traded for at the summer fair. There is a quirky tidbit about the use of silk. Even the roughest mountain men often wore silk base layers because the smooth fibers prevented the chafing of the wool and were surprisingly effective at trapping heat. Over the silk, you pull on 2 pairs of thick, hand-knitted wool socks. By the time you are done, your feet look like large, gray loaves of bread. You slide them into your moccasins, which are lined with rabbit fur. These aren't the thin, decorative slippers you see in gift shops today. These are heavy, functional boots made of elk hide, greased with bear fat to make them waterproof. The smell of the bear fat is pungent, a mix of old grease and wild forest. But it creates a barrier that keeps the slush and ice from seeping into your socks. Next comes the head and neck, where you lose a significant amount of heat if left uncovered. You wrap a long, wool scarf around your neck several times, tucking the ends deep into your jacket. Then you pull on a toboggan hat, a thick wool cap that pulls down over your ears. On top of that, you might add a hood made of wolf or coyote fur. The long, guard hairs of the fur catch the blowing snow before it can hit your face, creating a little micro-climate of still air in front of your nose and mouth. When you breathe out, the moisture from your breath catches on the fur, forming tiny crystals of ice that sparkle in the dim light. You probably believe that wearing a dead animal on your head is a bit macabre. But when the wind chill hits 30 below, you start to feel a deep appreciation for the wolf's natural engineering. You are no longer a modern person. You are a creature of the winter, cloaked in the textures of the wilderness. Dressing for the day is basically a low-impact cardio workout, and by the time you are fully suited up, you are actually starting to feel a bit of a sweat. This is dangerous. In the frontier winter, moisture is your greatest enemy. If you sweat into your wool, the dampness will eventually cool and turn into a layer of ice against your skin. You have to learn the art of venting. Opening a button here or loosening a scarf there to let the excess heat escape before it turns into liquid. It is a constant, subtle adjustment, like a pilot trimming the flaps on a plane. You realize that your modern, day counterparts spend their winters trying to get as warm as possible, while you spend yours trying to stay exactly at the neutral point where you are neither shivering nor sweating. It is a delicate, biological tightrope walk. You move to the corner of the cabin where your greatcoat hangs. This is a massive garment made from a heavy wool blanket, often called a capote. It has a large hood and a belt made of braided yarn. This is your final defense, the layer you only put on when you are headed out into the true teeth of the storm. The fabric is so thick it can almost stand up on its own. You jokes that if you ever fell over in the snow while wearing this, you would just have to wait there like a flipped turtle until the spring thaw, because the sheer weight of the wool would make it impossible to get back up. You wrap the sash around your waist, pulling it tight to seal the gap between your jacket and trousers. You are now encased in nearly 4 inches of fabric and fur. You are a walking fortress of human persistence. Your hands require special care. You have a pair of muff mittens, which are large, oversized wool bags that hang from a cord around your neck. Inside these mittens, you wear a smaller, more dexterous pair of leather gloves. This allows you to pull your hands out of the heavy mittens to perform a task, like loading a rifle or tying a knot, without exposing your bare skin to the metal, which would peel the skin right off your fingers in this cold. You probably think of mittens as something for children, but on the frontier, they were the gold standard. Fingers kept together share their warmth. Fingers separated by glove stalls are doomed to freeze individually. You slide your hands into the woolly depths of the muff, feeling the immediate surge of heat as your fingers find each other. As you stand by the door, ready to face the chores of the morning, you take a moment to appreciate the frontier perfume that now clings to you. It is a complex bouquet of wood smoke, lanolin, bear grease, and unwashed wool. Washing these clothes is a Herculean task that only happens a few times a year, so you simply become one with the scent. You realize that in the modern world, we are obsessed with being fresh, but here, the smell of your clothes is the smell of safety. It means the waterproofing is holding, the insulation is thick, and the fire is burning. You feel a strange sense of pride in your bulk. You are a shape in the snow, a silhouette that says a human being lives here and intends to stay. The mainstream historical fact that you reflect on is the role of the spinning wheel. In this survival, almost every piece of wool you are wearing was likely spun by hand, often by the women of the household during the long evenings of the previous winter. The thread was then woven on a loom or knitted by the light of a single candle. Your clothing isn't just a product. It is a record of thousands of hours of human labor. Every stitch is a deliberate act of protection. You think about the sheep that provided the wool, the plants that provided the dye, and the hands that moved the needles. You aren't just wearing clothes. You are wearing a community's effort to keep you alive. This thought warms you more than the wool ever could. You step outside, and the cold hits you like a physical blow. The air is so thin and dry it feels like inhaling powdered glass. But as the wind whips around you, you realize with a start that you don't feel it. Your personal atmosphere is holding. You can feel the wind pushing against the buckskin, trying to find a way through the fibers, but it is rebuffed by the density of the layers. You move toward the woodpile, the snow crunching loudly under your fur-lined moccasins. The sound is sharp and clear, a crick, crack, that echoes in the silent forest. You realize that your clothing has changed the way you interact with the world. You are no longer a victim of the weather. You are an observer of it. You can watch the snow dance and the trees sway without the urgent panic need to find shelter. You have brought your shelter with you. One of the more quirky tidbits of frontier life is the use of newspaper insoles. If your boots started to wear thin or the cold was particularly intense, you would fold up several layers of the local gazette and slide them into the bottom of your moccasins. The air trapped between the pages of the paper acted as a surprisingly effective thermal break between your feet and the frozen ground. You jokes to yourself that you are literally walking on the news of the world, keeping your toes warm with the reports of distant wars and political scandals. It is a reminder that in the wilderness, everything has a secondary, more vital purpose. A newspaper isn't for reading, it's for warmth. A book isn't for a library, it's for the fireplace. A curtain isn't for privacy, it's for a spare scarf. You spend an hour splitting wood, the rhythmic swing of the axe keeping your blood flowing. You have to be careful not to overdo it. If you feel that telltale dampness of sweat on your brow, you immediately slow down. You watch the wood fly apart, the pale inner grain of the oak contrasting with the dark, weathered bark. You feel strong. The weight of the clothes, which felt so oppressive in the cabin, now feels like armor. You are a knight of the frost, and the axe is your sword. You find a strange, quiet joy in the physical labor. In the modern world, we go to the gym to move heavy things for no reason, but here, every swing of the axe has a direct, visible result. More wood means more fire. More fire means more life. It is a simple, honest math that satisfies a deep part of your soul. Historians still argue whether the extreme weight of frontier clothing led to chronic back and joint issues for the settlers. Carrying 20 to 30 pounds of wool and leather every day is certainly a physical strain. But you suspect that the alternative, freezing to death, was a pretty strong motivator to keep those heavy coats on. You feel the muscles in your shoulders working, the heavy wool of the capote shifting with your movements. You aren't just surviving the winter, you are being forged by it. Your body is becoming as tough and resilient as the leather on your back. You look at your hands in their leather gloves, the skin darkened by work and grease, and you realize you don't recognize the person you used to be. The civilized version of you would be shivering and miserable, but this version is steady and focused. As you finish your work and head back toward the cabin, you see the smoke rising from the chimney, a thin blue ribbon against the gray sky. You think about the concept of home. In the summer, home is the land, the fields, and the forest. But in the winter, home is the 3 millimeters of space between your skin and your union suit. It is the micro-environment you have carefully cultivated and maintained. You realize that the frontier isn't just a place on a map. It's a state of being where the boundary between you and the world is constantly being tested. You have learned to respect that boundary, to reinforce it with wool and hide, and to guard it with your life. Back inside, the process of undressing is just as methodical as the morning routine. You don't just tear everything off. You remove the layers one by one, checking each for dampness or wear. You hang the heavy capote near the fire so the moisture from the snow can evaporate. You check your socks, feeling a sense of triumph when you find them perfectly dry. You pull off the buckskin jacket and the wool shirt, returning to the simple comfort of the union suit. The cabin feels incredibly warm now, even though the temperature is probably only 50 degrees. Your body has recalibrated its expectations. You sit by the hearth, the wool of your base layer still holding the heat of your labor, and you feel a profound sense of peace. The transition is complete. You have faced the great white void and returned unscathed. You have proven that with a bit of sheep's wool, some bear grease, and a lot of patience, a human being can thrive in a world that wants to turn them into an ice sculpture. You look at the pile of clothes on the bench, the armor of your daily battle, and you feel a strange kind of affection for them. They are your silent partners, your protectors, and your friends. You realize that the winter is not something to be feared, but something to be understood. It has its own rules, its own language, and its own dress code, and you have learned to follow all of them. You lean back against the stone of the chimney, the warmth seeping through the union suit and into your tired muscles. The rhythmic tick-tick of the cooling logs in the hearth is the only sound in the room. You find yourself drifting, the images of the snowy forest and the sharp crick-crack of the ice fading into a soft, gray blur. You are warm. You are safe. You are a settler, and you have mastered the art of the layer. The world outside is a frozen expanse of white, but inside the small, wool-lined circle of your life, it is always summer. You close your eyes, the smell of lanolin and wood smoke acting as a final, cozy blanket for your thoughts, and you prepare to dream of green fields and the first, gentle thaw of spring. But for tonight, the wool is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. The sun has barely crested the horizon, a pale, anemic sliver of light that seems to apologize for its own existence before it begins its inevitable descent back into the shadows. By 4 in the afternoon, the world outside is a deep, bruised purple, and you find yourself back within the amber glow of the cabin, the wooden door bolted against the gathering dark. This is the heart of the winter, the period where survival is no longer just about wood and beans, but about the architecture of your own mind. You sit by the hearth, the warmth of the fire a constant companion that you have begun to treat like a silent, glowing roommate. In the modern world, we are terrified of boredom. We fill every crack of silence with a podcast, a scroll through a feed, or a flick of a remote. But here, silence is the medium in which you live. You realize that you have to learn how to inhabit your own thoughts, to turn the small space of the cabin into a vast landscape of memory and imagination. If you think your internet going out for 2 hours is a crisis, try facing 3 months where the only new content you get is a different pattern of frost on the window pane. You reach for a block of cedar that you brought in from the shed last week. It has dried by the fire, its scent now a sharp, pleasant perfume that cuts through the heavier smells of wool and grease. You take out your pocket knife, the blade worn thin from years of sharpening, and begin the slow, rhythmic process of whittling. There is a specific, tactile joy in the way the wood curls away from the blade, like the skin of a very dry apple. You aren't making anything particularly complex, just a simple spoon to replace the one that cracked last month. but the focus required is a form of meditation. You find yourself noticing the intricate grain of the wood, the way the light catches the golden fibers. You jokes to yourself that this is your version of high-speed streaming, where the frame rate is measured in the minutes it takes to carve a single curve. It is a slow, beautiful occupation that keeps your hands moving and your mind tethered to the present. A mainstream historical fact that often surprises people is just how literate frontier settlers actually were. Despite the popular image of the uneducated woodsman, many families carried a small but precious library into the wilderness. You look at your own shelf, which holds a well-worn Bible, a copy of Pilgrim's Progress, and the essential Old Farmer's Almanac. These books are not just read, they are inhabited. You have memorized entire chapters, the words becoming a rhythmic chant that you recite to yourself while you work. You probably think of the Bible as purely religious text, but on the frontier, it was the primary source of drama, history, poetry, and law. It was the Netflix of the 19th century, offering stories of adventure, betrayal, and redemption that mirrored the struggles of your own life. You read by the flickering light of the hearth, your lips moving silently, as you follow the familiar lines, the ancient stories providing a bridge to a world much larger than your 16 by 20-foot cabin. The almanac is your other constant companion, a quirky mix of weather predictions, astronomical data, and useful advice that ranges from curing a cough to the best time to plant turnips. You find a section on riddles for the chimney corner and spend an hour trying to solve a particularly convoluted one about a man with 3 legs and no head. Historians still argue whether these printed materials were more important for their practical information or for the sense of cultural continuity they provided to isolated families. To you, it doesn't matter. The almanac is a window into the collective mind of your society. It tells you that even though you are miles from the nearest neighbor, you are part of a world that cares about the phase of the moon and the arrival of the first robin. You laugh softly at a joke in the margin about a city slicker and a mule, a bit of humor that has probably been told 1,000 times, but still feels fresh in the deep silence of January. One of the more quirky tidbits of frontier life is the creation of hair jewelry. This sounds slightly macabre to a modern ear, using the hair of loved ones to weave intricate rings, watch chains, or brooches. But in an era where photographs were a rare luxury and death was a frequent visitor, a lock of hair was a tangible, permanent connection to someone you loved. You spend a few evenings watching the light glint off a small, braided ring you made from your mother's hair, the fine strands woven into a pattern that looks like a tiny piece of lace. It is a delicate, focused task that requires a steady hand and a great deal of patience. It turns the long hours of isolation into a tribute to the people who aren't with you. You aren't just passing time. You are weaving your family history into the very fabric of your life. As the weeks crawl by, you notice that your perception of time has shifted. In the summer, time is a frantic rush of sun and growth. In the winter, time becomes a slow, thick liquid. You begin to mark the days not by the clock, but by the tasks you complete. Monday is for mending the heavy wool blankets, the needle, snicking through the thick fabric as you reinforce the edges. Tuesday is for cleaning the lamps and trimming the wicks, the smell of oil and burnt cotton filling the air. Wednesday is for the great inventory, where you count your logs and your jars of beans for the 100th time. You jokes that your social media is the window where you occasionally see a very judgmental squirrel who seems to be checking on your progress. It is a life of extreme focus, where the smallest accomplishment, a perfectly mended sock or a clean chimney, feels like a major victory. You find yourself engaging in what you call mental travel. You sit with your eyes closed, the warmth of the fire on your face, and you reconstruct the walk you took through the woods last August. You remember the exact shade of green on the ferns near the creek, the sound of the water over the stones, and the way the air felt humid and heavy. This isn't just daydreaming, it's a survival strategy. By keeping these sensory memories alive, you prevent the gray, white monotony of the winter from dulling your spirit. You realize that the mind is like a garden. If you don't tend to it, it will grow over with the weeds of despair and cabin fever. You plant seeds of memory and water them with the light of the hearth, creating a lush, internal world that the frost cannot touch. Music is another vital tool for keeping the mind busy. You have a small, dented harmonica that you keep in your pocket. You aren't a virtuoso, but you can play a few simple tunes, Wayfaring Stranger or Old Dan Tucker. The sound of the music is strange in the quiet cabin, a bright, metallic ripple that seems to startle the shadows. You find that the rhythm helps to pace your breathing and slow your heart rate. Historians still argue whether the extreme isolation of the frontier led to the development of unique musical styles, or if it simply preserved the folk traditions of Europe in a sort of cultural deep freeze. When you play, you feel the weight of those traditions. The notes you are playing were played by people in Scottish highlands and German forests hundreds of years ago, and now they are vibrating through the logs of a cabin in the middle of a frozen wilderness. You are a link in a very long, very musical chain. The psychological pressure of the winter is most intense during a long blow, a storm that lasts for 3 or 4 days without a break. During these times, you cannot even step outside to the woodpile without a rope tied to your waist for fear of getting lost in the whiteout. The cabin feels as though it is shrinking, the walls pressing in closer with every hour. This is when you have to be most disciplined. You create elaborate games for yourself, like trying to name every person you've ever met in alphabetical order, or calculating the square footage of the cabin, using only the length of your thumb. You probably believe that this sounds like the beginning of a horror movie, but it is actually the height of mental hygiene. You are keeping the machinery of your brain oiled and running, refusing to let the silence clog the gears. You spend one afternoon entirely focused on whimsies, small carved wooden chains or balls trapped inside a wooden cage, all carved from a single piece of wood. This is the ultimate test of whittling skill and patience. If you make one wrong cut, the entire project is ruined. You work slowly, the tip of your knife navigating the tiny gaps in the wood. It is a puzzle of your own making, a physical representation of the way you are trapped within the winter. But as the chain begins to move freely within the block of wood, you feel a sense of profound liberation. You have created movement where there was none. You have found a way to be free within the confines of your cage. It is a small, wooden miracle that you keep on the mantel, a reminder that the mind can always find a way to move, even when the body is stationary. The mainstream historical fact of frontier visiting is something you find yourself dreaming about. In some areas, once the snow crust was hard enough to support a sledge. Neighbors would travel miles just to spend an evening in a different cabin. They would bring food, instruments, and stories, turning the isolation into a brief, intense celebration of community. You imagine the sound of laughter in your small room, the smell of someone else's cooking, and the sight of a new face. It is a powerful motivator. You keep the cabin clean and the fire bright, just in case someone decides to brave the drifts. You realize that you aren't just keeping the cabin ready for yourself. You are keeping it ready for the possibility of others. It is an act of hope, a belief that the world still exists beyond the white horizon. You jokes that your current entertainment system is a window with a view of a single, half-buried pine tree. You have named the tree Arthur, and you spend a significant amount of time observing his struggle against the wind. You watch the way the snow accumulates on his branches until they bow down to the earth, and the way he shakes it off when the wind gust hits just right. You see yourself in Arthur, stubborn, a bit lonely, but fundamentally rooted. This kind of nature watching is not just a way to kill time, it's a way to find kinship with the world. You are both enduring the same trial, waiting for the same sun. You realize that in the modern world, we look at nature as something to be visited or conquered. But here, it is your peer. One of the more interesting, fringe tidbits of this time is the use of dream journals or extensive letter writing, even if the letters would never be sent. You have a small stack of paper and a lead pencil that you use with extreme care. You write letters to your siblings back east, describing the shape of the drifts and the taste of the vinegar pie. You don't know if they will ever read these words, but the act of writing them makes the people feel real again. You are projecting your voice across the miles, breaking the silence with the scratch of lead on paper. You find that your vocabulary has become more precise during the winter. When you have so few words to speak aloud, the ones you write down become more weighted, more intentional. You are crafting a record of your existence, proving to yourself that you haven't been erased by the snow. The transition from the day's activities to the evening's rest is a slow, graceful process. As the fire dies down, the shadows begin to reclaim the corners of the room. You put away your whittling, your books, and your harmonica, returning each to its proper place. The order of the cabin is a reflection of the order of your mind. You take one last look at the whimsy on the mantel, the wooden links glowing in the firelight. You have survived another day of solitude. You realize that the quiet of the winter is not a void. It is a space that you have filled with your own resilience and creativity. You have learned that you are enough. You don't need 1,000 distractions to be whole. You just need a sharp knife, a good book, and a steady heart. Historians still argue whether the extreme self-reliance fostered by these winters created the rugged individualism that is so often associated with the American frontier, or if it actually made people more dependent on the few social connections they did have. From your perspective, it's a bit of both. You feel more capable than you ever have, but you also value a single human voice more than you ever thought possible. You are a sovereign nation of one, but you are a nation that is eagerly looking for an alliance. You climb into your bed, the weight of the quilts feeling like a physical confirmation of your survival. The silence of the night is no longer a threat, it is a lullaby. You have mastered the art of being alone without being lonely. You find yourself drifting. The images of the carved wooden chain and the words of the almanac swirling together in a soft, grey mist. You imagine the spring, not as a distant dream, but as a logical conclusion to the work you are doing now. Every hour you spend whittling, reading, or remembering is a bridge you are building toward the thaw. You are a weaver of time, a sculptor of silence. You have turned the great white void into a canvas, and you have painted it with the colors of your own persistence. The wind whistles through the eaves, but it sounds like a flute now, a part of the music you have made. You are at peace. You are centered. You are a settler of the inner frontier, and tonight, your mind is as vast and beautiful as the snow-covered world outside. As you close your eyes, you think about the mainstream historical fact that many of our modern folk traditions, from quilting patterns to certain types of storytelling, were perfected in cabins just like this one. You are part of that creative legacy. The boredom of the winter was the forge in which the culture of the frontier was shaped. Without the long nights and the deep silence, the stories wouldn't be as rich, and the quilts wouldn't be as intricate. You are a participant in the making of history, even if your only audience is a single, judgmental squirrel and a pine tree named Arthur. You let out a long, satisfied breath, the cool air of the room, a refreshing contrast to the warmth of your blankets. You are ready for the dreams that only a quiet winter night can bring. Dreams of green valleys, warm rain, and the first sweet scent of damp earth. The rhythm of the fire's dying glow matches the rhythm of your thoughts. You think about the hair jewelry and how it turns something as temporary as a person's life into something as permanent as a piece of art. That is what you are doing with your winter. You are taking the temporary cold and the fleeting silence and turning them into a permanent strength. You have learned to find the luxury in a single candle, the adventure in a carved spoon, and the community in a memorized poem. You are a master of the small things, and in the wilderness, the small things are the only things that truly matter. You drift deeper into the dark, the weight of the quilts pressing you into the straw mattress like a stamp in wax. You are here. You are whole. And tomorrow, you will wake up and do it all over again, with a sharp knife and a steady hand. The transition to sleep is seamless, a final whittling away of the day's concerns. You are no longer a person in a cabin. You are a part of the winter itself. Quiet, enduring, and deep. The logs in the hearth give one final, soft pop, a punctuation mark at the end of a long, silent sentence. You surrender to the dark, the warmth of your internal world glowing like a banked fire. The winter may be long, and the solitude may be deep, but you have found the light within the shadow. You are a survivor, a storyteller, and a dreamer. And tonight, the silence of the frontier is the most beautiful song you have ever heard. The transition from the stillness of the cabin to the raw energy of the frozen forest is a shock to the senses, a cold plunge that wakes up every nerve in your body. You stand on the porch for a moment, the heavy door clicking shut behind you, and look out over a world that has been transformed into a crystalline kingdom of blue and white. The light is different today. The heavy gray clouds have parted, leaving a sky so clear and bright it feels like a polished sapphire. You squint against the glare of the sun, reflecting off the crust of the snow, a brilliance that can lead to snow blindness if you aren't careful. In the modern world, we wear polarized sunglasses to protect our eyes from the glare of a beach. But here, the entire world is a mirror, and you have to learn to read the shadows and the textures of the drifts to avoid losing your way in the brightness. You reach for your snowshoes, which are leaning against the cedar logs of the cabin, their wooden frames looking like giant, elongated tennis rackets. Putting on snowshoes is a ritual of patience, a series of deliberate knots and pulls that connect you to the history of the land. These aren't the modern aluminum and plastic versions you might find at an outdoor retailer. These are made of steamed ash wood and intricately woven strips of rawhide, often called babishi. You probably think of snowshoes as a simple tool, but they are a masterpiece of functional art. One quirky tidbit of frontier history is that different tribes and regions developed distinct shapes based on the local terrain: the wide, round, bare paw for the thick brush of the woods, and the long, pointed, Huron style for crossing the open, windswept lakes. You have chosen a versatile teardrop shape that allows you to float on top of the drifts rather than sinking to your waist in the powder. You jokes to yourself that this is the only all-terrain vehicle you will ever need, though the fuel consumption is measured in bowls of cornmeal, and the top speed is approximately 2 miles per hour if you have the wind at your back. As you take your first steps away from the cabin, you feel the strange, buoyant sensation of the snowshoes. Your weight is distributed across the wide frames, allowing you to walk over 5 feet of snow as if you are walking on water. The sound of your movement is a soft, rhythmic swish, thump, a gentle percussion that marks your progress into the silence. You carry your long rifle in the crook of your arm, the metal of the barrel cold, even through your heavy leather mittens. This rifle is more than a weapon. It is your provider. It is a flintlock muzzleloader, a piece of technology that requires a delicate touch and a deep understanding of chemistry. A mainstream historical fact often forgotten is that these rifles were surprisingly accurate at long distances, but they were also temperamental. If a single drop of moisture touched the priming pan, the gun would refuse to fire, leaving you with nothing but a very expensive club in the middle of a hungry forest. You move deeper into the woods, where the pines are so heavily laden with snow they look like giant, white-cloaked monks bowed in prayer. The air here is still and incredibly quiet, a silence so deep you can hear the soft, papery rustle of a single leaf falling from a distant oak. You are looking for tracks, the language of the winter forest. You find a series of small, heart-shaped indentations in the snow. A white-tailed deer has passed through here recently. You follow the trail, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that you have learned from the predators of the woods. You don't just walk, you flow. You pause every few steps, tilting your head to listen for the snap of a twig or the heavy, rhythmic breathing of a large animal. In the modern world, we are surrounded by constant noise, but here you realize that silence is your most valuable tool. It is the canvas upon which the forest writes its secrets. Historians still argue whether the disappearance of certain game species during this era was primarily due to the arrival of settlers with their rifles, or if it was part of a larger ecological shift caused by the tail end of the Little Ice Age. You don't have the luxury of debating the ethics of the hunt. You only know that the salt pork in your cellar is running low, and your body is craving the dense, iron-rich nutrition of fresh venison. There is a physiological reality to the frontier winter known as rabbit starvation or protein poisoning. This happens when a person eats only very lean meat, like rabbit or squirrel, without any animal fat. Despite eating a large volume of food, the body literally starves because it cannot process the protein without a corresponding source of fat. This is why you are searching for a large buck or a fat doe, an animal that has managed to maintain its reserves through the early months of the season. You are hunting for life, in the most literal sense. The tracking takes you up a steep ridge, where the wind begins to pick up, whistling through the bare branches of the maples with a low, mournful sound. You have to be careful of your own scent. The wind is a messenger that can carry the smell of your wood smoke and your unwashed wool for miles. You move against the wind, feeling the cold air biting at the small patch of exposed skin on your cheeks. You jokes to yourself that your fitness tracker is just the feeling of your lungs burning in the dry air and the way your muscles ache with every lift of the heavy snowshoes. There are no rest days on the frontier. If you want to eat in 2 weeks, you have to move today. You find a spot where the deer have been, yarding, a term for a sheltered area under the hemlocks where the snow is shallower and the animals huddle together for warmth. You see it then, a flash of tawny brown against the white backdrop. It is a large buck, his antlers looking like a crown of dry branches. He is browsing on the tender tips of the cedar trees, unaware of your presence. You feel a surge of adrenaline, a heat that spreads through your chest and steadies your hands. You move behind a large pine, the rough bark scraping against your jacket. This is the flow state that modern psychologists talk about, a moment of total immersion where the past and the future vanish, leaving only the present. You prepare the rifle, the click, click of the hammer being pulled back feeling incredibly loud in the silence. You check the flint, ensuring it is sharp and seated correctly. You take a slow, deep breath, watching the mist of your exhale vanish into the air, and you wait for the perfect moment. The process of firing a flintlock is a slow motion explosion. You pull the trigger. The flint strikes the steel, frizzen, and a shower of sparks falls into the small pan of black powder. There is a split-second delay, the flash in the pan, before the fire travels through a tiny touch hole and ignites the main charge inside the barrel. You are enveloped in a cloud of thick, white smoke that smells of sulfur and old fireworks. When the smoke clears, you see the buck has fallen. You feel a complex mix of emotions, a deep, visceral relief that your food supply is secured, and a quiet, somber respect for the animal that has given its life so that you might keep yours. This is the honest, brutal pact of the wilderness, a transaction that is handled with reverence and efficiency. Harvesting the meat in the middle of a frozen forest is a race against the temperature. You have to work quickly before the meat freezes solid or the scent of the blood attracts unwanted guests, like a roaming pack of wolves or a hungry mountain lion. You use a sharp skinning knife, the steel feeling slick in your hand. One of the more quirky tidbits of this process is that settlers often saved the sinew from along the deer's spine to use as an incredibly strong, waterproof thread for sewing leather and repairing tools. You also save the tallow, the hard fat that will be rendered down into candles or used to grease your boots. Nothing is wasted. You are a scavenger of necessity, turning every part of the animal into a tool for your survival. You jokes that you are the ultimate zero waste lifestyle influencer, though your audience is just the crows watching from the treetops. The journey back to the cabin is the hardest part of the day. You have lashed the quarters of the meat to a small wooden sled, which you pull behind you. The extra weight makes the snowshoes sink a bit deeper, and the rhythm of your walk becomes a heavy, straining grunt. The sun is starting to dip lower, casting long, violet shadows across the drifts. The forest looks different in this light, more mysterious, more dangerous. You find yourself looking over your shoulder, the primitive part of your brain scanning the shadows for movement. You realize that out here, you are both the hunter and the potential prey. The frontier doesn't care about your plans or your accomplishments, it only cares about the laws of energy and heat. You keep moving, the swish, thump of your snowshoes the only thing keeping you tethered to the world of the living. You reach the clearing just as the first stars begin to prick through the indigo sky. The cabin looks like a tiny, glowing coal in a vast sea of blue. The smoke from the chimney is a welcome sight, a signal that the hearth is still warm. You are exhausted, your legs feeling like lead, and your fingers numb with the cold, but you have won the day. You hang the meat in the small smokehouse you built behind the cabin, where it will be protected from scavengers and preserved by the cold. You take a final look at the forest, the dark trees standing like sentinels against the night. You feel a sense of belonging that you never felt in the crowded cities. You are a part of this landscape now, a creature that knows how to move through the drifts and speak the language of the wind. Inside the cabin, the transition is a slow thawing of the soul. You peel off your layers, the smell of the woods and the sulfur lingering on your clothes. You sit by the fire, your hands wrapped around a mug of hot cider, watching the feeling return to your toes. Historians still argue whether the physical toughness required for these hunts led to a shorter lifespan due to joint wear, or if the high-activity lifestyle actually kept frontier people remarkably healthy compared to their sedentary counterparts in the East. You suspect it's a bit of both. You feel old in your bones, but young in your spirit. You have proven that you can provide for yourself, that you are not dependent on a supply chain or a store shelf. You are a sovereign individual, and your kingdom is the 16 by 20-foot space around the hearth. One of the more quirky, fringe tidbits about winter hunting is the use of ice skates, made of animal bone. While not common for hunting, some settlers in the northern territories would lash polished cow or elk bones to their boots to glide across the frozen rivers, a technique used for centuries in Scandinavia. You imagine yourself gliding across the pond on bone skates, a ghostly figure in the moonlight. It's a reminder that even in the middle of a survival situation, the human spirit finds ways to innovate and perhaps even find a little bit of joy in the environment. You probably believe that frontier life was 100% misery, But there is a profound satisfaction in the mastery of a difficult skill. Gliding on ice or floating on snow are forms of magic that the modern world has largely forgotten. As the evening settles in, you find yourself reflecting on the mainstream fact of the fur trade. The very woods you walk today were once the battleground for global empires, all of them fighting over the pelts of beaver and fox. The luxury of a gentleman's hat in London was paid for by the grit and blood of men who moved through these same drifts. You are walking in their footsteps, but your motivations are simpler. You aren't hunting for profit. You are hunting for tomorrow's dinner. This shift in perspective makes the forest feel more personal, less like a resource and more like a partner. You are a temporary guest in this white kingdom, and you have learned to follow its rules. You spend an hour cleaning your rifle by the fire, the rhythmic shush, shush of the cleaning rod providing a soothing background noise. You oil the metal and check the flint, ensuring that it is ready for the next time you need it. The rifle is your lifeline, and you treat it with the reverence a priest might give a holy relic. You jokes that your dating life is currently limited to a 3-foot long piece of iron and wood, but at least it never talks back and always helps with the groceries. You find yourself smiling at the thought. The isolation of the winter can make you a bit eccentric, but it also gives you a very clear sense of what truly matters. A clean rifle, a full smokehouse, and a warm hearth are the true markers of wealth. The wind outside has shifted to a low whistle, a sign that the temperature is dropping even further. You check the latch on the door and add a heavy log of maple to the fire. The room is filled with the cozy, savory smell of a small piece of the venison roasting on a spit. The juice drips into the fire with a soft, rhythmic sound, sending up puffs of fragrant steam. You eat slowly, the meat tasting of the wild forest and the cold wind. It is the best meal you have ever had, not because of the seasoning, but because of the effort. You realize that in the modern world, we have decoupled the act of eating from the act of living. Here, they are one and the same. You are eating your own endurance, your own skill, and your own survival. As you prepare for bed, you think about the concept of the silent crawl. The way you move through the woods when you are close to an animal. You find yourself applying that same patience and focus to your own thoughts. You don't rush into the dark, you move into it with a steady, quiet confidence. You are at peace with the winter. The drifts that once felt like obstacles now feel like a soft, protective blanket. You are a settler of the north, a traveler of the great white void, and tonight you have earned your rest. You let the images of the tawny buck and the sapphire sky fade into a soft, gray mist. The rhythm of the fire's pulse is the only clock you need. Historians still argue whether the frontier experience created a unique form of environmental consciousness, or if it was purely exploitative. From your perspective, it's a relationship of deep, mutual respect. You know that if you take too much, the forest will fail, and you will fail with it. You are a part of a delicate balance, a single heartbeat in the vast, frozen lungs of the wilderness. You close your eyes, the warmth of the cabin feeling like a physical embrace. You have survived the hunt, you have provided the meat, and you have mastered the snow. The world outside can continue its icy dance, but inside, the fire is bright and the belly is full. You are a survivor, a provider, and a hunter of the frost. The transition to sleep is like the flash in the pan of your rifle, a quick, bright spark followed by a deep, powerful momentum into the dark. You are drifting now, the weight of the quilts pressing you into the mattress. You imagine the snow falling outside, covering your tracks and erasing the evidence of your journey. The forest is reclaiming its silence, and you are reclaiming your peace. Tomorrow is another day of wood and water, but tonight, the venison is in the smokehouse and the hunter is at rest. You surrender to the deep, heavy sleep of the successful, your dreams filled with the scent of cedar and the sight of the first, distant thaw. The air inside the cabin has changed its texture, shifting from the brittle, bone, dry sharpness of January to a heavy, damp coolness that feels like a weight against your skin. You wake up not to the silence of the frost, but to a new sound that seems to vibrate through the very logs of your home. The rhythmic, persistent tap, tap of water hitting the wooden porch. It is the sound of the world beginning to weep as the ice finally loses its grip. You lie in bed for a long moment, the heavy wool blanket still pulled up to your chin. But for the first time in months, you don't feel the urgent need to huddle against the cold. The fire in the hearth is a low pile of orange embers, no longer fighting a desperate battle against the void, but simply keeping the dampness at bay. You realize that you have survived the deepest part of the dark. The great white void is receding, leaving behind a world that is messy, gray, and wonderfully alive. Getting out of bed feels different today. Your muscles are still stiff from months of wood, chopping and hunting, but there is a lightness in your chest that wasn't there before. You walk to the window and scrape away the last of the frost, which has become thin and translucent, like the skin of an onion. Outside, the snow is no longer a pristine, glittering blanket. It is pockmarked and heavy, sagging under its own weight. The deep violet shadows of winter have been replaced by a soft, misty gray. You see the first patch of bare earth near the chimney, a small, dark island in a sea of slush. It is just mud and dead grass, but to your eyes, it is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. It is a promise kept. It is the evidence that the sun has not forgotten you. You jokes to yourself that your landscaping has finally transitioned from ice palace to mud puddle, a trend that you suspect will be very popular for the next 3 weeks. This period is often called the sugar moon by the indigenous peoples, and it marks a critical turning point in your survival. As the days grow warmer, but the nights remain freezing, the sap inside the maple trees begins to move, traveling from the roots toward the branches in a surge of liquid energy. This is a mainstream historical fact that many people forget. Maple sugaring was not just a sweet treat for frontier settlers. It was an essential source of minerals and calories during the starving time. When the cellar bins were nearly empty, you gather your wooden buckets and your hand-carved spiles, the snowshoes feeling heavy and awkward in the softening snow. You trudge toward the grove of maples, the swish, thump of your movement replaced by a wet, sucking sound as the snowshoes sink into the slush. You find a large, ancient tree and drill a small hole into its trunk, the wood feeling soft and moist. As you tap the spile into the hole, a clear, bright drop of sap begins to flow. You catch it on your tongue. It is cool, woody, and only faintly sweet, the very blood of the forest waking up from its long sleep. The process of sugaring off is a labor of love and patience. You set up a large iron kettle over a fire in the clearing, filling it with gallons of the clear sap. It takes nearly 40 gallons of sap to produce a single gallon of syrup, which means the fire must be kept roaring for days on end. You spend your afternoons stirring the boiling liquid, the steam rising in thick, sweet clouds that stick to your hair and clothes. One quirky tidbit of frontier life is that children were often given snow candy during this time. Hot, concentrated syrup poured directly onto a clean patch of crusty snow, where it would instantly harden into a chewy, golden taffy. You make a small piece for yourself, the intense sweetness making your head spin after months of salted meat and cornmeal. It is the taste of victory. Historians still argue whether the transition from the Little Ice Age was felt more through these subtle shifts in the sap run, or through the sudden, violent breaking of the river ice. But for you, the victory is measured in the weight of the syrup jars on your table. As the thaw continues, the silence of the winter is replaced by the roar of the water. The small creek near your cabin, which has been a silent ribbon of white for 4 months, is now a raging torrent of gray water and churning ice. You stand on the bank, watching the massive cakes of ice collide with a sound like distant thunder. It is a dangerous time. The mud season of the frontier was often more treacherous for travel than the deep freeze. A wagon could sink to its axles in the bottomless mire of the trails, and the flooding rivers could sweep away bridges and livestock in an instant. You stay close to the cabin, moving carefully over the slippery ground. You hear the crick-crack of the remaining ice on the pond, a sound that reminds you of the logs ticking in your hearth. The world is breaking apart so that it can be put back together in a new, green shape. You find yourself performing the spring cleaning of the soul. You open the door and the windows wide, letting the cool, damp air wash through the cabin to carry away the stale smell of wood smoke, lard, and unwashed wool. You carry your blankets outside and hang them over the railing, beating them with a rug beater until the dust flies out in clouds. You realize that you are shedding your winter skin, the heavy capote, the fur-lined moccasins, and the thick mittens are tucked away into a cedar chest, their job finished for another year. You move with a new agility, your body feeling strangely light without the 20 pounds of survival gear you've been wearing since November. You jokes that you feel like a sheared sheep, a bit vulnerable to the breeze, but much more aerodynamic for the chores ahead. Your diet changes as well. The shriveled potatoes and the last of the salt pork are supplemented by the first spring tonics, the bitter greens that are the first to emerge from the thawing soil. You find a patch of wild ramps and dandelions near the creek, their bright green shoots pushing through the dead leaves. These greens are packed with the vitamins your body has been craving, and they taste of earth and rebirth. You probably believe that eating weeds is a sign of desperation, but to a frontier settler, these plants were medicine. They cleansed the blood and woke up the digestive system after the heavy, fatty foods of the winter. You saute them in a little bit of the remaining pork fat, the smell of fresh greens filling the cabin like a garden. Every bite feels like it is knitting your muscles back together, preparing you for the frantic work of the planting season. You spend an evening sitting on your porch, watching the sunset, The light is different now, longer, warmer, and tinged with a delicate shade of pink. You see the first robin of the year hopping across the muddy clearing, its red breast a vibrant splash of color against the gray. You realize that you have a new relationship with the concept of time. In the modern world, we think of a year as a circle, but here, it feels more like a spiral. You have returned to the same point in the season, but you are different. You are tougher, quieter, and more deeply rooted in this place. You have looked the great white void in the eye and refused to blink. You feel a profound sense of gratitude for the small things, the sound of a bird, the smell of damp earth, the sight of a single green bud on a willow branch. These are the true luxuries of the frontier. The transition is nearly complete. The ice is gone from the pond, leaving a dark, still surface that reflects the budding trees. The mud is starting to dry into a firm, workable soil. You take out your bag of seed corn and run your fingers through the dry, yellow grains, hearing them click, click, together like tiny teeth. Soon you will be back in the fields, the cycle of growth and harvest beginning all over again. But for now, you allow yourself this moment of rest. You have survived the coldest winter, and you have done it with grace, humor, and a sharp axe. You look at your cabin, the small wooden sanctuary that held you safe while the world froze, and you feel a bond with it that you can't quite describe. It isn't just a house, it's a part of you. Historians still argue whether the extreme isolation of the frontier led to a permanent change in the human personality, creating a pioneer spirit that values self-reliance above all else. You suspect that the change is more subtle. It isn't that you don't need people, it's that you know you can survive without them if you have to. It is a quiet confidence, a steady heartbeat that says, I am here and I am enough. You watch the last sliver of the sun disappear behind the ridge, the first spring peepers beginning their high, pitched rhythmic song in the marsh. It is a chorus of thousands of tiny voices, all of them celebrating the fact that they, too, have survived the dark. You join your breath with theirs, a long, slow exhale that releases the last of the winter's tension. You think back to the first frost, the building of the woodpile, the ceiling of the logs, the darkness of the cellar, and the silence of the deep snow. It all feels like a dream now, a story you told yourself to get through the night. But the calluses on your hands and the scars on your boots are real. You are a survivor of the frontier, a traveler who has returned from a long, cold journey. You have learned the secrets of the wool, the language of the tracks, and the patience of the whittler. You have found the sweetness in the tree and the medicine in the weed. You are ready for the spring, but you will carry the lessons of the winter with you forever. As you step back inside and prepare for sleep, you don't bolt the door quite as tightly. You leave a small gap to let in the sound of the peepers and the scent of the thawing forest. The fire is just a small, comforting glow in the corner. You climb into your bed, the straw mattress feeling familiar and soft. You are drifting now, the images of the green shoots and the flowing sap swirling together in a gentle, warm mist. The world is waking up, and you are waking up with it. You are home. You are safe. And the spring is finally here. The world outside is softening now, the edges of the winter blurring into the gentle, hazy light of a new season. You can feel the tension leaving your body. your muscles relaxing into the deep, supportive warmth of your bed. The rhythm of your breathing is slow and steady, matching the quiet pulse of the forest as it prepares for the bloom. Think of the way the sap moves, slow, silent, and inevitable. Let your thoughts move in that same way, drifting away from the chores of the day and toward the peaceful, dark horizon of sleep. You have done the work. You have stood your ground. The cold has passed, and you are surrounded by the promise of growth and light. Imagine the smell of the damp earth, a rich, ancient perfume that speaks of renewal and rest. Feel the weight of the blankets, no longer a shield against a frozen void, but a soft, comforting embrace that anchors you to this moment of peace. The sounds of the night, the distant murmur of the creek, and the soft sigh of the wind in the budding branches, are a lullaby designed just for you. There is nothing left to do, nowhere else to be. You are a part of the cycle, a part of the history, and a part of the land. Let your mind go quiet, like a cabin after the fire has been banked. The shadows are long and soft, and the world is tucked away under a blanket of stars. You are drifting further into the dark, a gentle descent into a place where the air is always warm and the dreams are always green. You have survived the winter, and now you have earned the right to simply be. Sleep is coming for you now, a soft, velvet wave that washes over your thoughts, carrying you into the deep, restorative rest of the pioneer who has reached the end of the trail. The journey is over. The spring is here, and you are at peace.